Do you believe that memories can be transferred from one person to another through the heart? It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? But what if I told you that an ordinary woman, after receiving a transplant, began to experience sensations, dreams and changes so profound that she began to doubt her own identity? No, we are not talking about delirium or madness. We are talking about something that defies science, spirituality, and the very idea of who we are. Sarah spent years fighting to survive. When she finally received the news that there was a compatible donor, she thought it would just be a physical restart. But what she got was much more, and much more frightening too. Songs she had never heard that now moved her to tears. Places she had never been to, but that appeared clearly in her dreams. Unknown people who aroused real affection, and the most disturbing, an inner voice that seemed to know things she had never experienced. Coincidence? What if I told you that? All of this led her to discover a closely guarded secret, a real crime, and that her own surgery may have been part of something dark. This story will shake you. It will make you rethink your relationship with life, with death, and with what it means to carry someone else's heart inside your chest. And what's more, it will show you that sometimes what we call a miracle can come along with a mission that you don't choose but that chooses you. So, are you ready to discover the truth behind this mystery? Because once you embark on this journey, there is no turning back. In the silent corridors of the hospital, the sound of the heart monitor was the only evidence of Sarah's fragility. For years she lived with the shadow of fear, an invisible companion that robbed her of her strength day after day. The solitude of each dawn between sighs and whispered prayers carried an ancient prayer to live. But on that cloudy afternoon, the unexpected happened. The door opened slowly, and the doctor, with a sparkle in his eyes that mixed understanding and hope, murmured the phrase that made her heart, the still weak one, tremble. "We found a compatible donor." Time stood still. A whirlwind of emotions, gratitude, fear, insecurity, and a shy joy invaded her soul. And there, in that sublime moment, the power of kindness seemed to materialize before her, as if the universe itself responded with affection to her silent cry. Sarah didn't know who the donor was, but she felt in some inexplicable way that there was more to the story. The name George was still unknown to her, but his existence was already intertwined with hers in a connection of love and mystery. The heart that had previously beaten in another chest now pulsed inside her with renewed strength, as if it carried messages, feelings, perhaps even memories. This new beginning was not only medical or physical, it was also spiritual. A rebirth that demanded more than courage from her. It required humility, trust, and a deep surrender to the unknown. It was as if, by receiving that heart, she had also received a mission. And between exams and tears, Sarah asked herself, why me? And what exactly am I carrying inside me now? While the world outside continued its hurried pace, inside room 412, a story of silent reconciliation began to be written. The gesture of a stranger, wrapped in the power of forgiveness and generosity in its purest form, had saved her life, and more than that, lit a new flame of inspiration within her. The surgery was scheduled, and the day before, holding the nurse's hand with a mixture of fear and faith, Sarah thanked her in a low voice. "If I get another chance, I'll make it." Count! Simple words, but loaded with moving power. There was born not only a survivor, but a keeper of secrets, and without knowing it, she was approaching the greatest emotional adventure of her existence, a journey where the heart would speak louder than any reason. The room where the laments of fragility had once echoed was now filled with light and shy smiles. Sarah had survived. A new life was unfolding before her, with the lightness of a new beginning and the invisible weight of an enigma. In the early days, she simply allowed herself to breathe, feel the touch of the wind through the window, and smile at the sound of the strong heartbeat that now filled her chest. But soon, like someone who receives mysterious notes in the middle of the night, small changes began to whisper around her. A sudden taste for jazz, whereas before she could barely stand instrumental music. a strange aversion to foods she had previously loved, vivid dreams of places she had never visited. At first, she thought it was the effect of the medication, or a strange way her mind was dealing with the trauma. But there was something else, and something that made her feel different. One night, she dreamed that she was walking down a dirt road lined with fields of sunflowers. The smell of the wet grass was so real that she woke up with the scent still in her memory. The image of a blue bicycle leaning against a fence kept coming back night after night. Sarah felt as if she were accessing memories that didn't belong to her, as if she were experiencing echoes of a story that was alien, yet strangely familiar. Fear mixed with curiosity, and the loneliness, which had previously been cruel and silent, was now accompanied by inner voices that she didn't know where they were coming from. Understanding? Maybe. Or was it the awareness that something greater was revealing itself? Among these doubts, traces of compassion and empathy were also born for someone she didn't know, but who somehow seemed to live inside her. When she told the medical team, she received gentle smiles and reassuring words. It's normal. Traumas do that. But Sarah wasn't satisfied with rational explanations. This went beyond logic. It touched a deep point in the soul, where intuition and wisdom reside. It was as if she was being gently guided to discover something, a silent invitation to the reconciliation of identities, as if George's love, still a faceless name, had left fingerprints on her soul. She then decided to record her feelings, her dreams, her new tastes. She kept a notebook on her bedside table, where she wrote down everything from melodies that appeared out of nowhere to phrases that seemed to be whispered in the wind. And it was there, among the pages scribbled with kindness, hope, and a hint of insecurity, that she began to notice a pattern, an invisible thread connecting everything. And this thread, little did she know, was about to lead her to a secret that would change everything. The nights began to have a different weight. Sleep, once just a refuge for recovery, had become a bridge to another reality. Sarah closed her eyes in the hospital, but woke up, inside the dream, in an old mansion with green windows, where children ran barefoot through a dirt yard. She saw faces. I could smell things. He experienced emotions that did not belong to him, but that emerged with the strength of ancestral memories. In one of the dreams, a woman named Helena hugged him with overwhelming affection and said in a choked voice, "George, you have always been the light of our family." She woke up in tears, gasping for breath, with the name George burning in her mind. That was no longer a metaphor, nor the effect of medicine. It was as if each beat of that new heart was carving a story inside her, a story that begged to be heard with respect, humility, and understanding. Sarah tried to resist the idea. "They're just dreams," she repeated to herself, like someone trying to sweep an entire storm under the rug. But the more I denied it, the more vivid it all became. The details were haunting. The house number, the specific sounds of a dialect she didn't consciously know, the habit of whistling an old tune as she walked, something she'd started doing without realizing it. Deep inside, insecurity competed for space with a new perception. What if, for some still hidden reason, your heart was now also a key? An open door to the story of someone who, although gone, still wanted to be understood, welcomed, forgiven. That feeling of carrying memories that weren't hers required a more compassionate and courageous outlook from her. The kind of look that only arises when we surrender to the mystery with true empathy. It was then that he began to write down the names, the faces, the emotions. One figure in particular began to recur frequently, a tall young man with a calm smile and melancholic gaze. In every dream, he seemed to be protecting something. Sometimes a child, others a diary. There was one night when he said, "You need to know," and he pointed to a lake surrounded by pine trees. Sarah woke up with the distinct feeling that she had heard a secret, but still didn't understand what it was. It was like putting together a soul puzzle, where each piece involved not only the fragments of another life, but also the awakening of one's own essence. And so, in a mix of inspiration, fear, and a strange gratitude, she began to ask herself, how far will this go? And what exactly did that heart want to tell him? The sky was partly cloudy that autumn morning, and Sarah felt an inexplicable urge to get out of the house, as if something, or someone, was gently calling her to take a walk with no specific destination. Her feet took her to a park, hidden among ancient trees and worn wooden benches. She had never been there before, or at least that's what I thought, because when you entered, your body reacted like someone returning to a familiar place. The breeze carried a familiar scent, and the leaves crunching beneath their feet seemed to echo unlived memories. It was there, between the curves of a stone path, that a silver-haired lady sitting on a bench looked up, smiled tenderly and said, "Anna, are you back, dear?" Sarah froze. The name echoed within her like a whisper from the past. The woman kindly held her hand and said she hoped to see her again, and that there was something I needed to give him. Sarah, in a mixture of bewilderment and curiosity, heard the lady tell stories that seemed like legends, coming from the dreams that had been visiting her for weeks. He talked about George, a sensitive young man who used to write in a diary whenever he visited the park. And then, with a sweetness that mixed affection and compassion, she took from her bag an old notebook with a worn leather cover and said, "He asked me to keep this. He said that one day someone would come for it." Sarah's heart, ironically now George's, beat faster. When I opened the diary, the world seemed to spin. The words written there not only coincided with the dreams he had had, but they also used identical expressions, detailed places, feelings, and even the same lines. It was as if she had dreamed every page. Reality folded before her, revealing a connection that defied logic, but asked for only one thing: understanding. Every page read was a bridge between two souls. Sarah cried silently, overcome by an emotion that bordered on spiritual commotion. George's stories spoke of fears, loneliness, hope, and a love never fully lived. A story interrupted, but never forgotten. And there, between the lines of the diary, she found the name Anna repeated with affection. A young woman that George loved in secret, who frequented that park, and who perhaps was the seed of something unfinished. Sarah felt touched by a greater mission. The power of kindness had crossed their lives in a mysterious way, and now, that heart pulsed not only with blood, but with stories. It was as if the diary was an invitation for her, with all her empathy, wisdom, and courage, to help complete a journey that was not just hers, but that now needed to be hers. And, almost inevitably, she decided she needed to go all the way. The words in the diary rang in Sarah's mind like distant bells, echoing truths she did not yet fully understand. But the donor's identity was finally clear. George, a young man with a sensitive soul, passionate about writing, the details of life, and the beauties that few understood. With the name in hand and the diary as her guide, Sarah went in search of official records. He discovered that George had died about 7 months before the surgery, in a car accident on a little-traveled road. But something about the way the news was reported struck him as too cold, too fast. No in-depth investigation. It wasn't just intuition. It was as if the very heart that was now beating in her chest was begging her not to accept that superficial version. She felt that there was a cry for justice, for truth, for reconciliation. As he reread the last pages of the diary, George's tone changed subtly. The boy recorded strange encounters, growing distrust, suspicions about people close to him, and a phrase that was marked in red, like a silent scream. "If something happens..." To me, it was no accident. Sarah froze. It was like hearing a scream in the dark. He mentioned that he was investigating strange activity at the company where he was doing his internship. Embezzlement, blackmail, manipulation. But the most impactful thing was realizing that everything was written with the lucidity of someone who is afraid, and even so chooses to face it. This made her feel immense gratitude for George and a visceral desire to do something about it. After all, that heart was not just flesh and blood. It was a reliquary of courage, hope, compassion, and a cry for justice that needed to be heard. With her mind in a scramble and her heart racing, Sarah found herself facing a new kind of fear. Not the fear of dying as before, but the fear of discovering something that would change everything. There was a clear call to action, a silent request for her with her new life to do something meaningful, and deep down this moved her deeply. It was as if with each beat her heart was saying, "Go, don't give up." Wisely, she decided not to act impulsively, but began to put together a dossier with everything she read in the diary, cross-referencing it with old news reports, public records, and even social networks of people mentioned. With each discovery, she felt that George's story became part of her own. With respect, she knew, it wasn't about revenge, it was about light, about bringing to light what had been hidden, and deep down, a doubt began to grow. What if it wasn't just a secret? What if it was something bigger? The search for answers was no longer just curiosity. It had become an emotional, almost spiritual need. Sarah began to seek out, with care and respect, the people who had been part of George's life. Childhood friends, college classmates, even neighbors on the street. Each conversation was like opening a forgotten drawer inside herself. A childhood friend, upon seeing her, said something that paralyzed her. "You have his eyes." Sarah, not knowing how to react, just smiled. But inside, something fell apart and was remade at the same time. It was as if she were finding not only information, but fragments of a soul with whom she shared her heart. With each new story, a feeling of affection, understanding, and also a strange familiarity was born. As if George, in some mysterious way, was alive inside her, not only physiologically, but emotionally as well. A former teacher, while leafing through George's old essays, commented tenderly, "He always talked about love, about mysteries, about intertwined lives. Sometimes I thought he felt too much." Sarah recognized herself in that sentence. Feeling too much. Since the surgery, her inner world had expanded with an intensity she could barely name. It was as if compassion, previously dormant due to so much suffering, had awakened with a hunger for life. When she met an ex-girlfriend of George, she heard stories of gestures of kindness, of silent courage, of a young woman who carried deep fears but was still able to see the best in people. "He had a gift of listening with his heart," the girl said. Sarah felt overcome by a gentle emotion, a mixture of originless longing and newborn hope. With each person, a piece of the puzzle gained color, shape, and soul. Over time, Sarah began to realize that she was not just investigating George, she was being transformed by him. His own values began to expand, as if he had now acquired the ability to see the world with a more human, more loving, and wise perspective. Talking, to those who knew him, was like talking to versions of himself scattered throughout the world. Each hug, each shared tear, each whispered story was a form of reconciliation between what he was and what she was now beginning to be. An encounter with the essence of humanity, filled with forgiveness, courage, and a growing sense of purpose. And then, among old notebooks, memories, and nostalgic smiles, a new latent question arose. If his heart beats in me, could it be that his love is also still out there, waiting to be found? George's diary, which had previously seemed like an intimate reliquary of emotions and reflections, now revealed dark pages filled with codes, encrypted names, times, and places. Sarah read and reread each word as if deciphering a map to escape, a maze. Conversations with former colleagues and the files she herself had begun to cross-reference made it clear that George was close to something big, something dangerous. In the last pages, he reported the discovery of an illegal organ trafficking network, a structure so well disguised that it seemed untouchable. Understanding fell upon Sarah like a bolt of lightning. Her surgery, that second chance she had thanked with so much gratitude and love, might not have been just a miracle of medicine, but the tragic result of a corrupt mechanism. Anguish took hold of her. What to do with this truth that burned in silence? The diary mentioned hospitals, doctors, intermediaries, even a name that Sarah had heard in the corridors of the hospital where she had undergone surgery. At first, She tried to deny the idea. It was simply too horrible to be true. But the pain in the eyes of those who had lost George, combined with the precise details of the accounts he had left, formed a web that was impossible to ignore. The inspiration that had driven her until then was now taking on the contours of real courage. It was not enough to feel, it was necessary to act. And as if George himself were whispering to her from deep within, she understood. This was no longer just about him, it was about all the other Georges that could exist. Lives ripped away, stories interrupted, humanity wounded by greed and inhumanity. Sarah knew she had a rare opportunity in her hands, to be a bridge between darkness and light, between silence and justice. The power of kindness now needed to be practiced with strategic wisdom. Fearful, yes, true fear, the kind that shakes your bones. She began to document everything. She digitized the diary, created protected copies, and discreetly sought out investigative journalists. Trust was not something she could offer easily at that moment. Her mind was spinning with paranoia and caution, but also with faith. She remembered a phrase from George that came back to her dreams like an anchor. Truth has a price, but omission costs the soul. Sarah didn't know how far this would go, but her humanity, now amplified by the story she carried inside her chest, would no longer allow her to remain silent. It was time to transform all that commotion into purpose. And between the weight of carrying a secret and the strength to reveal it, she began to walk the path. A path that could lead to redemption, or to the abyss. And deep down she felt there was still more to discover. In the days that followed the discovery of the conspiracy, Sarah's world seemed suspended between two realities. One made of commitments, routine, and apparent normality. The other, subterranean, made of whispers, intuitions, and a presence that became increasingly constant. The voice. It wasn't a hallucination. It was something more subtle, more intimate. An awareness that did not arise in her ears, but in her chest, beating along with her heart. In moments of tension, fear, or decision, she felt a strength arise from within, as if her own body were whispering, "Calm down, breathe, now go." And she went, instinctively. Sometimes she said phrases that she did not think, but that calmed. Situations, revealed paths, protected decisions. It was as if George, through the love that he had left engraved in the beating of his own heart, was there, present, exercising his last form of compassion. The most striking episode happened on a grey morning, when Sarah was almost confronted by one of the names mentioned in the diary. She was in a coffee shop, reviewing files on her laptop, when the man sat down 2 tables away. She did not know him, but her heart raced in a different way, as if trying to warn her. Suddenly, a clear, calm, but firm voice echoed inside her. "Close it, go away." Without thinking twice, she obeyed. She left before anyone else approached. And as she crossed the street, she felt an immediate relief, almost as if someone had pulled her from the fire. The gentleness of that inner presence was not intrusive. It was like a moral and emotional compass, something that guided her with wisdom, compassion, and a rare kind of connection. It was scary at times, but also comforting, like being alone but never truly alone. Over time, Sarah came to trust this presence. She began to talk to it in her thoughts, as if sharing secrets with an old friend. The answers came not in ready-made phrases, but in impulses, directions, instant insights. "This is not madness," she told herself. "This is love in its purest form, a love that transcends life, flesh, logic, a love that manifests itself through inspiration, courage, and a bond so deep that no scientific explanation could describe it." What started as an oddity was now part of who she was, and although he still didn't know where all this was going to lead, he no longer had any doubts. There was something between heavens and hearts that could not be ignored, and more than ever, he felt that his mission was just beginning, because his heart was beating, yes, but now it was beating with a voice, a purpose, and a calling that still echoed ahead. There was a different weight that morning. Sarah woke with her chest restless, as if each heartbeat carried an ancient urgency. George's diary was now digitized, encrypted, and scattered across secure backups. His notes, data cross-referencing, and testimonies were in order. And most importantly, inside her was something no weapon could contain: the power of truth. It wasn't just a matter of justice. It was reconciliation, it was love, it was honor. She knew who was behind George's death, and even knowing the risks, she decided she would not remain silent. It was time for reckoning. In the old parking lot of a clinic mentioned in the newspaper, he arranged a meeting under the pretext of delivering confidential documents. As he saw the man who had destroyed so many lives approaching, his body froze, but his heart, oh, his heart, beat steadily. "Now is the time," said the soft voice, guiding his steps serenely. The dialogue began with disguises and false smiles, but as soon as Sarah revealed the names, places, and copies of the diary, the tension exploded like lightning from a clear sky. The man tried to change the subject, threaten, manipulate. But this time Sarah was not the same scared young girl. She was the echo of a silenced voice. It was George, it was her, it was every victim of that network. Armed with secret recordings, activated on the cell phone hidden in her pocket, and with a reporter lurking nearby observing everything from a distance, she was more protected than she seemed. Still, there was a moment of real danger, a sudden lunge, a shove, a muffled scream. For a moment, she felt like it could all end there. But amidst the chaos, an internal, almost instinctive impulse made her deviate, as if the heart itself had taken control, guiding its movements with precision. Survived, and he won that moment. The police, already warned, arrived minutes later, alerted by the reporter. The man was arrested, and with it a web of horrors began to unravel thread by thread. Sarah, sitting on the curb with tears in her eyes and shaking hands, took a deep breath for the first time in a long time. It wasn't relief, it was enlargement. A type of liberation that only happens when you honor the truth with integrity. She was no longer just the recipient of a vital organ. She was the bearer of a legacy. George, even after her departure, had found justice through her. And at that moment, surrounded by a dense atmosphere of compassion, gratitude, and emotion, Sarah understood that she had completed a stage, but something inside her still pulsed insistent, as if a final door was about to open. And with it, the answer to the question he had never dared to ask. Does the love left by George still wait for a new beginning? The weeks following the confrontation were marked by silence and reconstruction. Not the silence of fear that had already been overcome, but the silence of reflection, of deep gratitude, of understanding that only arises when we go through storms, carrying on our shoulders the story of another soul. Sarah decided she couldn't keep all this to herself. George deserved to be remembered, not just as an organ donor, but as an honest, courageous human being, driven by values that today seem so rare: truth, justice, the power of kindness. He started writing, at first as a rant, then as a mission. The pages came to life, not just with dates and facts, but with feelings, details, gestures, dreams, and scars. His book, entitled Voices of the Heart, became not only a testimony, but a bridge between pain and hope, an open letter to humanity. The launch took place in a small independent bookstore on a late afternoon tinged with golden tones. People who knew George were there, alongside strangers whose lives had also been touched by stories of giving and rebirth. Sarah spoke calmly, between tears and smiles. She talked about her dreams, her inner voice, her diary, and the love that had lodged itself within her, even though she had never experienced it as a romance. His heart was pounding, and still is, he said, placing a hand on his chest. The commotion was palpable. There was no spectacle there. There was humanity. Her words touched me deeply because they overflowed with sincerity, humility, and affection, and what's more, because they invited action. At the end, he distributed free copies of the book to families of patients on the transplant waiting list. A simple gesture, but full of wisdom. And there, as the sun set outside, Sarah felt something different: peace. Today, Sarah lives more fully. Your days are guided by real empathy, respect for the stories of others, and a renewed vision of what it means to be alive. She doesn't romanticize pain, but honor. Understand that death is not the end, but a passage. That true love can indeed cross physical borders. That compassion needs no explanation. And that when we listen to our heart, truly, it always leads us to what is essential. She still dreams about George sometimes, calm, soft dreams, like meetings between friends who know they have already accomplished what they came to do. And every time you tell your story, you hear a steady beat inside you that seems to say thank you. The mission is now greater, to inspire, transform, awaken. Because living, she learned, is more than breathing. It's about giving yourself. It's leaving a legacy. And George's keeps pulsing. And now tell me, after everything you've seen here, do you still think that life is all about routine, bills, and rushing around? That living is just surviving on autopilot? Sarah's story, and George's, shows that this isn't the case. It shows that each heartbeat can carry a purpose that goes far beyond our understanding, that even pain can be transformed into a mission, that true love, sincere forgiveness, and the courage to take a stand can change destinies. How many times have you ignored what you felt inside? How many times have you stifled your intuition, your calling, your value? What if today is the day you decide to listen to what your heart has been trying to tell you for years? You may not have had a transplant, but what if you need a transformation? What if now is your moment to leave a legacy, to reconnect with what matters, to act with more empathy, more kindness, more understanding? If this story touched you, and I know it did, don't let it die here. Share. Comment below. What do you feel needs to change in your life? What truth have you been hiding out of fear? I want to read and walk with you on this journey. And, of course, if you want to continue diving into real, impactful stories full of wisdom and inspiration like this one, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Because believe me, what's coming can transform you from the inside out.